I spoke of 1974 being a great year. I have to say, 1975 was almost as great. During the summer, Anita and I decided that we would take Cheryl and Cliff to Europe. And as I mentioned before, we were going to do just two cities. We were going to spend a week in London and a week in Paris. However, Cheryl now reached the point where she did not want to go on vacations with us anymore. She was getting to be too old. After all, she was mature enough to pick her own choices of excitement and best wishes. 1975 means that she was 18 and a half years old.
A senior in high school?
So she decided, no, actually, as I think about it, she would have graduated. Let's see, when did Cheryl was born in 56, so she graduated in 74. I'm sorry.
Okay, so she's already into college.
She was already in college.
Mm-hmm.
But this was in the summer.
Yes.
So she could have gone. But of course, now she was a college student, so I think she regretted that. She was very sorry later on. As when Jeffrey stopped going with us, he years later told us that he also regretted missing some of the trips. So Cliff loved it. Cliff was now an only child, as he was as soon as Cheryl went off to college. And when Cheryl went to college, she was a freshman. I guess Jeffrey was a senior. So we had the two kids in college. But when we looked forward to it, we knew that by the time Cliff got to college, Cheryl would be finished. So that was, and we would actually have a year off. So we were doubling up now for the course of sending the children to college, but we would get our respite, our payback sometime in the future. So this was 1975. We made the trip. London, the weather was cold and miserable. Paris was unbearably hot. So hot, no air conditioning in Paris at that time, in the hotel that we stayed at. You know, I can't tell you that we stayed at one of the fancy hotels. We still were not exactly in the chips. But, and I remember in the Paris hotel, we actually had to have a bathtub to get into, because did they not have showers? I don't remember. I can't remember that part. But it was very enjoyable otherwise. It was really a week in two of the capital cities of the world. Paris and London, not necessarily in that order, but the reverse order. 1975, we came back, and the next thing that I remember is our 25th anniversary coming up in December. So Anita and I decided that for our 25th anniversary, we'd like to go back to Miami Beach, where we spent our honeymoon. Fabulous honeymoon. And so we told the children that we're going to go down. Cheryl was upset. She didn't react like she normally would, go and have a great time. It was, why would you want to do that? You know, it was obvious to us that Cheryl had plans of her own, that she was going to make a big party for us and stuff like that. Not that she was going to make it, she and her brothers, but we knew who the guiding light was. So, not that they forgot us, you know, they still managed to come up with a great gift for us, which we celebrated a little beforehand. They got us tickets to a Broadway show. They gave us $50 to pay for dinner or supper. And they made reservations at the Waldorf Astoria for us, which is where we spent our honeymoon night, which they knew about, of course. So that was great. I mean, what a wonderful gift to get. And we went in and we can't remember what the show was. I wonder if it needed this,
Mhm.
but we just ate it up.
Mhm.
And we went into a place and spent that $50 easily for not even a full dinner, but it was our kind of candlelight supper type of thing. And spent the night in the Waldorf, bringing back great memories of the past. And we went home. How did we get to Miami Beach? It wasn't connected. You know, I was thinking about on our honeymoon, we spent the night at the Waldorf, and then my cousin Myron picked us up and drove us out to the airport,
Mhm.
and that's how we got there.
Mhm.
But I think the kids joined us for breakfast. I think they joined us for breakfast, which was really thrilling. Yeah, everything was working out well.
Yes.
We had a great time, and we went off and celebrated our 25th anniversary of Miami Beach. We now, of course, were able to afford a better hotel than the Vanderbilt, which was back on 22nd or 23rd. Was that the time we went to Casablanca? Oh, no, or further up. Not important. It was a great anniversary that we spent. Came home. You would think that was over. You don't know my daughter.
Mhm.
She started to work on something else, unbeknownst to us. Sometime in February, we had a date to go out with Vit and Mac. And we were going to go out for dinner and a movie, you know, and that was it. So we went out, during the dinner, it was decided, we don't really want to go to a movie. You know, let's go home, there's a hockey game on tonight. Mac was a hockey fan of sorts also, so it all seemed right. So we did that. And after dinner, we came home. We came home and found 50 people in our house. Cheryl and the boys had arranged this whole thing, catered it all, and it was just shocking. Janine says she could never be surprised, but she was surprised this time. She was surprised, I was surprised. Who would have thought that a December anniversary is going to be celebrated in February? But everything was there. All our friends and all our relatives, and everybody kept it secret. Mac and Vit were smiling, the Cheshire grins, like, boy, we put something over on you. We even got you to make the suggestion to come back home. You know, it just worked beautifully.
Good.
And that's the way we celebrated our December 24th, 25th anniversary, sometime in February. There was something I forgot to mention about the trip that we took to London and Paris. You know, I had mentioned before that I was now the Marine Systems Worldwide Controller. So I had mentioned to my boss, Jack Walsh, that we were going to go on this vacation and that I was probably going to contact the people in England because that was going to be our first stop. And he advised me not to. He thought it wouldn't be right for me to tell them because then they would feel obligated to try to treat us and do certain things for us that might not look too good. You know? So with that in mind, of course, I felt like that was a direct order. Don't contact anybody in England because, and I could see the point. I didn't necessarily agree with it. But that's the way it was. Now, on the other hand, there was a time when I was able to take advantage of my connections. In 1976, if you recall, they held the Summer Olympics in Montreal. And since we had a Canadian, well, I didn't mention that before. In addition to the European and the domestic, we also had a Canadian operation that was part of my responsibilities. And Bob Mancycler was the controller of our Canadian operation. He's a very interesting guy. He's German, born in Germany, and he came over here sometime after the war. You know, every time you meet a German, especially if you're Jewish. There's certain thoughts go through your mind. He was at that age, or maybe almost that age, you know, how was he? Plus the fact, and Bob was really a gregarious kind of individual. He was so friendly and so nice and kind that you couldn't think those things about him. And I'm sure he knew that I was Jewish. As a matter of fact, if you've heard of some of Hitler's henchmen, the name Martin Bormann would come up. And I think Martin Bormann might very well have been a brother-in-law of von Van Suyten. He was telling me in conversation of how he originally came to Canada. He was a first son. And in Germany, they did have this, what do they call it, when the first son inherits everything. Nothing is left for anybody else in the family except as the first son would get. Primogeniture, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The laws of primogeniture. But he didn't want it. He decided, he gave it up. He gave it up. And he came to Canada. And to see him, you would believe it, he worked as a woodsman, a logger up in the Canadian wilds someplace where he really was quite a powerful looking guy, and he was a kind of friendly guy that when you shook hands with him, you better hold on with the other hand or else you would lose one. You made sure never to introduce him to a woman, my wife in this case, without warning, but don't put out your hand and don't take his, because you can have a problem. But he was a nice guy. So I asked him whether he could get me some tickets to the Olympics, and that we would make it a point to get up there at a certain time. He said sure, he would get the tickets. And he sent me the tickets, and I said, well, how much do I owe you? And he wouldn't tell me. So I looked at the tickets and saw the price that was on them, assuming he got them for list. I'm not sure to this day. I sent him a check. The check was never cashed. I certainly was in no position to give him cash because I knew the way he was going to act. There was no way he was going to accept money for this. So that's one of the perks you get of the job. So here we were going to the Olympics. But the places in Montreal, as you might expect, were terrible. We had the previous experience of having gone up to Montreal at the time of Expo. Is it called Expo? Yes, Expo. Whatever year that was, I didn't speak about that.
67.
It was in the earlier in the 70s. And ended up, I know we had Cliff and Cheryl with us, and we ended up in some house. It was terrible. It was they charged a lot of money for it too. So I try to avoid this. And our general manager of the Canadian operation actually helped the situation and invited us to spend a couple of days or a weekend with him on his home in an island in Lake Champlain. It's American. Interesting. It was considered part of Vermont, but you could only get there from New York by car.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can go by boat, of course, from any place. But it was a lovely place. It was on a point, and aside from being treated royally, it was my recollection that his wife went bathing every morning, and it was frigid.
Yeah.
The waters up there were a little too cold for my taste. But she went in there every morning and kept herself young and healthy, that type of thing. So anyway, so we stayed there, I think for 2 nights. I have to run that one through, Anita also.
Mm-hmm.
Then we drove up to Montreal and watched, I remember they had the finals of the high jump. And Dwight something or other was the American, was the favorite. And he pulled what I considered one of the big boners of the day. You know, in the high jump, every time they reach a certain height, you can choose to waive it and not do it. Of course, that means that if you miss on the height that you finally do jump, then you're only giving credit for the last one that you jumped on successfully. So he was the big favorite, and he waived his jumps. But then when he finally did jump, he missed. The 3 tries were messed up. I think the weather was not great, so he may have had a problem with that, but he should have realized that. So because he had none of the earlier jumps, he didn't get any medals. He finished way down, and it was the big upset of the whole Olympics, as far as the Americans were concerned. So we went there, and from there we went to Ottawa, where Bob Mancycler was, and he treated us royally there. We had dinner at his home. We had home a nice little woman for a wife, and it was very pleasant. And so it turned out to be a very nice Canadian Olympic vacation that we enjoyed. Came back home, and a problem came up. When I first examined the books of the Marine Systems operation, recognized that there was something wrong. What was wrong? It's hard to explain maybe, but I'll try. When you sell from one division to another part of the same company, you're allowed to earn the profit. So that Charlottesville would ship stuff to England and take a profit on it. England then picked up this stuff, and in this particular case, there were these giant, not pontoons, but the things that balanced the big ships.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have like 2 to a ship.
Mm-hmm. Like a gyro guy?
Not like a gyro, no. The gyro fin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, they were fins.
Mm-hmm.
They were the gyro fins,
Mm-hmm.
and we manufactured them. We manufactured them in Charlottesville. As I said, when Charlottesville shipped it up to Canada, up to England,
Mm-hmm.
across to England, then they picked up a profit in their billing, especially since you're in 2 different countries.
Yes.
You know, so the U.S. government would insist that they pick up a profit so that they can get the proper taxes over here. England would then pick them up at cost as part of their inventory. So recognize what's happened. Nobody's earned anything yet because we haven't sold to a company. But Charlottesville shows a profit on this stuff. What does happen, and the county people might understand this better, is when somebody like my office consolidates all of the Marine Systems operation, you have to eliminate that profit because there was no profit earned. Well, this was not done. This was not done. I discovered it. I brought it up. The next thing you know, we had a big adjustment. Big adjustment down.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't make our profits for that year. Nobody's ever happy when that happens. The fact that all we were doing was correcting something before, nobody wants to hear that. That was, yesterday's news. So it's like, when you find a problem, you fix it. Well, the only way to fix this problem was to sell the gyrofins to an outside customer. One of the countries that Europe sold to. And they couldn't do it. The sales were slow. So consequently, our numbers didn't look too good. And I was invited into my boss's office, Jack Walsh, who I thought very highly of me, and he, in very nice terms, invited me to resign, or asked me to resign. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, Wassenberg, the controller of the whole division, I'll call it, the super division, says he'll take you back in your old job. And the guy who took my old job was now gonna come over and be the controller of the Marine Systems operation. What are you gonna do? You know, I can't fight City Hall. I still had a job, which is fine. Jack mentioned to me later on, he thought I took it very well. My attitude was, you're losing a good controller. Al Roman, who's coming over to take my place, is not gonna do the kind of thing, but maybe that's what they want. I mean, I made my own problem by discovering this
yes.
situation.
Yes.
To go explain that to somebody who's not an accountant, then it becomes a little difficult. But in any event, Wasson Baird, who was my old boss and now again my new boss, he, of course, understood, and maybe that's why I still had a job. It wasn't really anything I did. I couldn't sell the stuff. I wasn't a salesman. It was not part of my responsibilities. So I went back to doing consolidations of the whole thing, back to my old job. I didn't lose any money on it. Maybe I lost a bonus for 1 year because of it, but it was something. I wasn't in this job very long when Wasson calls me in and says, Jimmy Papp would like to talk to you. I mentioned Jimmy Papazissimos. He was at Cliff's Bar Mitzvah before. We were quite friendly. I had no idea why he wanted to talk to me. So I went down to see Jim and he said, look, we've been in negotiation and we've made an acquisition. A flight simulation outfit down in Virginia. And I'd like you to go to be the controller. He says, I spoke to Wasson about it, and Wasson said, you can have anybody you want, and I want you. Sounds great, especially after this other business of mine. So I said, well, I don't know, let me take a look, you know. So, of course, I went home, and I discussed it with Anita. We had discussed in the past, way back in 1956, when Spangler was doing a lot of divisionalization, and she was not really ready to leave. I mean, she was very close to her mother, she was very close to her grandmother. She had nobody else. She had no siblings, you know, this, that, and the other thing, and it really was not, we were very happy that they didn't ask me to go down to Charlottesville or go down to Clearwater or Gainesville or Salt Lake City, which were all places, or Phoenix, that we were spreading out to. What she didn't know was somebody once told me that they won't send you to any of these places. I said, why not? He said, because you would have to deal with the bankers down there. And your name is Cohen. Every once in a while you get one of these things
Yes.
that hits you. You say,
Yes.
well, that's very nice. I'm glad. Because I wasn't ready to go. But now this new thing approached, and Anita's mother was gone. Her grandmother was gone. And she said she was ready, which was a pleasant surprise because I thought it was a good opportunity. Before I took the job, I went back to Wasson and I said, look, do I have a choice about this? Do I have to take this job? Do I have to prove myself to you again? And he said, no, you don't have to. It's strictly up to you. That also made me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So we went down there, we went looking around and did all of our studying and found out that the Kennedys lived in McLean and all of this was very nice. And at first we thought that the office was in McLean. It turned out to be in Merrifield,
Mm-hmm.
which is off Route 50 in Arlington Boulevard. That's not important. So we looked around and looked at houses. She found a new house that they were building, a new one. The only problem was that house was going to cost $90,000. Our house in Seaford was worth about $54,000. We found out. So I came back to Jim and I said, we can't afford it. You know, we knew that we were going to get reductions in things like auto insurance and things like real estate taxes and things like state taxes, even sales taxes. But the big thing was we're gonna sell a house for 54,000 and buy a house for 90,000? That's quite a jump. So Jimmy said to me, look, I want you to go. You go home, you figure out what it will take. What it will take. So I went home, I figured it out. I came back to him and I said, it'll take a 10% increase in salary. And I gotta get a bonus of about 15,000, 17,000, whatever the number was. You know, I wanna get back on the bonus list that this corporation had. And that's it. And he said, okay. So that's how it happened.
Uh-huh.
How did they give me this extra bonus, signing bonus, if you will? It's very cute. I don't think they could have done it the regular way. So what they did, you know, in a case like this, they guaranteed the sale of the house. They'd get an estimate, or I would get an estimate and give it to them and say the house was worth 54,000. So what he did is he said, we will guarantee the house for 70,000. So that's what happened.
Right.
So when the house was sold, I put in my papers, and they paid off over and above like it was a $70,000 sale, even though the house went for less than 54,000, as it turned out.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us down to Virginia.
Virginia. Which town were you in initially? Living
We lived in Fairfax.
in
This
Fairfax.
is all Fairfax County.
Fairfax.
But this was what they considered, it was about a mile south of George Mason.
Mm-hmm.
And interesting thing, got time for one more. Yeah. We bought the house in October. The closing, the sale took place the end of October, and they wanted me down here for the signing papers. And that's when I started. So that we must have bought the house in October,
Mm-hmm.
and it was for delivery in March.
Mm-hmm.
So that November, Thanksgiving, I get a call from a real estate agent down here, and she says, "You're not going to believe it." I said, "What?" "Your house burned down."
Oh my God.
What do you mean my house burned down? And I don't own the house. No, the house you bought, it burned down. Really? What happened? Vandals, kids were in there. They started a fire, and they burned the whole place down. And it was the only house. It was it was a cul-de-sac, and this was one of the corner houses on the cul-de-sac. So we were able to get out of what we could commit ourselves for, but we decided we didn't want to. The guy said, "Look, if you stay with it, I guarantee you we won't be more than 3 weeks late on our promised delivery date." And that's a good way to buy a house, because they really concentrated on this. To take care of the fire, they had to lay another layer of concrete in the basement. It was just burned down. But I ended up saving a little money, because one of the things that we wanted to do was to convert to a stall shower. And he said, "Can't do that unless you give me an extra $400 or some such number like that." I forget. Well, some change, or maybe it was in the washing machine in the laundry room or something. But I came to the the tub for the second floor ended up in the basement after the fire. So I said, "You don't have any changes to make right now. You're going back to." So he forgave me this extra charge for the change that he would have had to make. And then we moved down to Virginia.
So the first time in your life, you and Anita are out of New York and a different part of the country, and start a different chapter in your life. The children are winding down. They're in college. The children.
Let's talk about the children. Cliff was crazy about it, and we checked on him,
Uh-huh.
and he liked it for 3 main reasons.
Uh-huh.
Cheryl was mad as hell. We went and moved away from all of her friends. That's
Uh-huh.
before she met Jimmy.
Uh-huh.
But, and here she had all her friends back in Seaford.
And how was Jeff about it?
Jeff was floating around Europe at the time.
At
He
the
couldn't
time.
care less,
Mhm.
one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So,